lost his head. Yes.
I want to ask, what is that? I've seen like that little ball he holds in his hand. What is that? What
That's
are
the
those
orb.
Okay.
So lots of rulers hold the orb in one hand. The Pope speaks each year at Orbi, at Fide, faith and state, or whatever. So that means the physical earth. So he has the power over the material world. Of course, God gives him that. He doesn't have the scepter on the other side, but that's kind of, the two of them go together usually. Good question.
Does it have any functional use, or is it just like purely symbolic?
It's just symbolic. The scepter, they don't hit anybody with that. You know, that would be, it's all jewel encrusted and everything else, you know. They carried it around on pillows, you know, to keep it safe, you know. The funnest thing, though, for me is that they carry a rock down from Scotland for him to get crowned on. You know, they put it under the throne, you know, he sits above this rock, you know, and then they carry the rock all the way back, you know, to Scotland. That's just so. But in any case, King Charles I, his father, ended up in conflict with Oliver Cromwell. And you get Oliver Cromwell. Oh, yeah, and Cromwell's head. Why is that a separate page? Because, well, I'll explain. Westminster Abbey, videos. Okay, well, you get the idea. There's lots of stuff about Oliver Cromwell. That's a great movie, actually, where Obi-Wan Kenobi, it's actually not Obi-Wan Kenobi, what's his name? Alec Guinness. Same as the beard, right? And Richard Harris. There we go. I think this is
Living with opioid addiction can be a struggle, trapped in a cycle of opioid use, withdrawal, and cravings.
Gentlemen, His Majesty.
That's Oliver Cromwell.
Pray be seated.
This isn't the scene I was hoping
Your
for.
coming is nothing if not timely. My Lord Stratford's head has but barely fallen. Gentlemen.
So, interesting movie, but Oliver Cromwell was the head of the army, and in fact led the army in a fight against the Irish. But the people were against the Roman Catholicism that Charles II had, because of the various infighting between the different religious parts of the Civil War in England. And Cromwell was the leader of, not strictly speaking, the Puritans, but you know, the non-Catholics. In any case, because Charles kept insisting on Catholic things, he married a Catholic from France. He built a palace for her and was shipping all kinds of wealthy things, art and stuff. And part of the religious arguments were over icons. And so for the Protestants in England, they thought all this decoration and all these statues and all these things were, you know, an affront to God. You know, they wanted to whitewash the churches. Oddly, they enhanced the music. You know, so Bach, you know, was ordered when he was first hired to write the church music for Dresden. He was told, keep it simple. You know, and he said, sure. Basically. Aber auf Deutsch, right? And so he ended up writing absolutely gorgeous music. I don't know if I've showed you any.
TurboTax Pro Edition, 37%.
Sorry. This is getting challenging. It used to be a lot more fun. So the goal was to keep music from being emotional. And I don't know that you can listen to Bach without feeling an emotion. Although notice the church doesn't have any decoration except white. Well, there is some. I don't know which one. But so the people were upset about all this Catholicism associated with King Charles. The army actually ended up fighting against King Charles' forces with Oliver Cromwell leading it, and he lost. And so he was arrested for treason. And famously, King Charles, I can't be treasonous, I am the state. So this is a conflict between believing in the social contract that you're only king because we put you there, or the top-down belief that I'm the king because that's who God appointed to be here, right? So my power doesn't depend on you accepting me. My power comes from the Pope through God, etc., right? This is a big deal, and he's put on trial, loses, and they chop his head off. Meanwhile, his son Charles, who will become the second, is in France, and his tutor is Thomas Hobbes. So Thomas Hobbes is connected with the monarchy, and yet in his Leviathan, he writes this social contract, that we form this social contract for our rights, to protect our rights of life and liberty, etc., right? There's actually 3 social contract philosophers we'll mention quite rapidly together. The one is Thomas Hobbes, who seems to be the original one to give us this. John Locke, who's the more famous one because his influence on Thomas Jefferson basically gave us the contract that we have partly. The Iroquois gave us some, the Iroquois Federation gave us some as well, which we usually don't highlight. But in any case, and then the third one, social contract philosopher from this time period, is Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who I think he's disgusting. And his theory of social contract resulted in the revolution in France in 1789, even though he was dead. They used his theory, and as a result of that, you ended up with the Red Terror, or the Terror. The guillotine was the main office holder, and they chopped the heads off of lots and lots of people, including Robespierre, who was the head of the revolution anyway. So it got everybody, right? Anyway, one of my friends, Joseph, has several sized guillotines that he made. Well, that's a whole other thing. What else? So, Oliver Cromwell is the Lord Protector for a while. They offered to make him king, and he said, we just threw out the king. And so I'm the Lord Protector. And when he died, his son took over, and he was a terrible leader, and so didn't last very long. And so they decided to invite James to come, and he became the king of England next. And actually that turned out to be terrible because he was Catholic. And then they had to invite someone else. They invited William, who was one of the stadtholders in the Netherlands. And his wife actually was kind of in line for the throne anyway, so they invited William and Mary, and they came, and that was called the Orange Revolution, not to be confused with the one that didn't work in Moscow. So, but Rousseau came up with a theory that resulted in just death. And that was pretty much because his contract said no one gives up their rights to an executive. Everybody has the right to vote on everything. And guess what? That results in just pure chaos, which is what happened. And so, that obviously doesn't work. But Hobbes's theory looked to Oliver Cromwell as if he were saying Oliver Cromwell had the right to rule, because the people forming the contract elect who is their executive, right? So Oliver Cromwell says, Hobbes supports me. Some of his advisors, for example, John Milton. John Milton is quite famous for Paradise Lost, but John Milton was also Oliver Cromwell's secretary. And basically all the documents that are collected from the reign or rule of Oliver Cromwell were handwritten by his secretary, John Milton, letters to France. You captured one of our state ships, please give it back, etc. That kind of everyday business, right? It was also John Milton. But Oliver Cromwell's son didn't do a very good job, so we end up having him replaced. And it wasn't James, it was actually, I'm sorry, before James, it was Charles II came back. He was invited back. And one of the first things he did was he had Oliver Cromwell's body dug up and had his head cut off and put on a stake outside of London. Paybacks, right?
Is that like an intimidation tactic or just like payback? Like you
Paybacks, I think.
Huh.
What happened? I thought I had a link to Cromwell's head. I've never looked at that page before. Sorry. Trigger warning required. Don't look at it. It looks grotesque. But yes, they put his dead head on a stake. So in any case, where am I going with that? So the social contract. What brings that about, I suppose, would be a good question. And that's Leviathan. There's actually several books that Hobbes wrote. De Cive is on the Citizen. Others, I mentioned that the picture shows all these individuals. These are all people that make up the state. So Hobbes was for a strong authority. Yes, John.
Do they mention anything about indentured servitude, like serfs or slavery?
The one that especially strikes me is John Locke. John Locke was a secretary for another British philosopher that I always have trouble remembering. Let's go. We'll do him along with Spinoza. So, as the assistant to a noble, John Locke is kind of the next generation of philosopher. So he's influenenced by Thomas Hobbes and the social contract, but he's also influenced by Spinoza, who we're going to talk about next class. And Spinoza gives him this idea of all men are equal, really. You know, the idea that, well, they don't talk about women, of course, sorry about that, but you know, that takes a while to begin. But in any case, the idea that you have different religions. Spinoza lives in the Netherlands where there's all these different religions in competition with one another, and his argument is that we should all get along. We're, after all trying to do science. It's just we're approaching it from different ethnic or ethical perspectives. And that influences Locke, who argues that there should be a separation between church and state, basically. You shouldn't have the church in charge of the state. And that's, of course, what Thomas Jefferson learns from that. When we think of slavery, initially, he was in charge of importing the slaves and setting up. He's the one that set up the contracts for the Carolinas, because Carolina is Charles. So this is King Charles, right? Basically, it's in honor of King Charles, the state Carolina, and they're importing slaves, and that's one of the ways that England really becomes wealthy as a result of this slave trade.